The last 2 decades of the 20th century were a golden age of technology. The rise of cell phones, the World Wide Web, personal computing, autonomous drones.
Change is occurring so rapidly that even those involved find it difficult to keep pace.
Witnessing every milestone was the TV series Beyond 2000. Its presenters travelled the globe, searching for innovations that would give us a glimpse into the future. Now that we're in the future, it's time to look back at the tech that did and didn't change the world. From the iconic to the offbeat.
Ready?
We're travelling back.
Fire.
Before 2000. Throughout the 20th century, our relationship with animals had been changing, and we were viewing them in a whole new light.
We started to understand that animals actually might feel pain. There was also more research coming out about animal rights and their experiences, and that really changed the way that we treat them and the way that we see them.
And in the 80s and 90s, that empathy grew. Pets were now part of the family, and we became oddly fascinated with the idea of talking to wildlife.
People started wanting to feel a bit more connected to their animals and to pets. And we came to appreciate that animals are a little bit smarter than we've given them credit for.
And as our understanding deepened, so did the drive to protect endangered species. Poachers turned into enemy number one, and we saw some iconic comebacks.
When I see them flying in the wild, it's hard not to get goosebumps.
We found new ways to live alongside animals in beast mode. Speaking with animals has always felt like a wild fantasy. But in 1987 Chicago, this remarkable bird proved it wasn't impossible.
What is it? Shower. Yes.
Alex was an African grey parrot with a Midwest accent and an impressive vocabulary.
Keychain.
That's right, it's a keychain. Good birdie.
In just 10 years, Dr. Irene Pepperberg had taught him how to speak English.
He can label 30 different objects, 6 colors, 5 shapes. Colors: rose, green, blue, gray, yellow, orange, and some work on purple.
Great.
She's getting it. Just wait a minute. It takes a sec to get it from the fridge.
Like a true Chicagoan,
I want grape.
Okay, you can have the grape.
he wasn't afraid to ask for what he wanted.
Do you
I'll
want
pick up corn.
He did. He
pick up
has the
corn?
corn.
I got some corn. Here you are.
Do you want the corn?
Alex wasn't a one-trick Polly. Dr. Pepperberg was trying to prove that birds were just as smart as chimpanzees or dolphins.
There was a pervasive idea that the size of our brain related to how intelligent we were. And this is where the idea of being bird-brained came from, that birds had smaller brains and thus weren't as intelligent as other species.
But Alex was turning that theory on its head. He could count,
If you will tell me how many are here, I'll give you some nuts. Okay, what's here?
2. 1.
Okay, you can have the 2 wood.
he could even play spot the difference.
What's different?
Color.
Good, Parrot. That's a very complicated trial that you saw because he was paying attention not just to the objects, but to my question to determine whether I was asking what was same or what was different.
Perhaps all these years, bird intelligence had been flying under the radar.
Alex proved that it wasn't just about bird mimicry. He showed us that they do have the ability to think cognitively, make decisions, and have feelings.
But Ian Finlay would soon discover even parrots had off days.
Go on, you tell me.
At least tell us the color.
Tell me what color.
Yellow.
No.
That's row.
That's right, Rose.
Rose.
Good birdie.
Red, rose, or roe, it was close enough for the cracker. Meanwhile, in California, seals were trying to knock Alex off her perch.
These sea lions here at the Long Marine Laboratory in Santa Cruz in California have demonstrated an ability to understand quite complicated sentences. And I hope I'm going to be able to show you how it works. Now, what I'm going to try and do is to ask Rocky, which is her name, to pick up the football in the middle of the pool and take it to Evelyn over there. So what I'm saying, first of all, person, which is the object, and then football, which is the subject, and then fetch, which is the verb. Quite a complex little performance.
Understanding just words is very different to understanding syntax. For example, it's very different to say, I'm ready to get in the hot car, as opposed to, the ready car, I'm hot to get in. Sentence structure is a really incredible tool for creating more meaning from fewer words.
Rocky only knew 7 signals, but it translated to over 1,000 commands and impressive tricks. It showed us the potential of interspecies communication. But to truly feel connected to animals, you had to venture down under. The Monkey Mia Caravan Park was a hotspot for human-dolphin interactions in the wild. Over 100,000 tourists and scientists visited the site each year.
What is really amazing is that even though the children and everybody make a lot of noise, laughing and clapping, the animals don't seem to mind it at all. And the only thing that people have to be careful of is that not to touch the blowholes on top of their heads or to touch the top of their fins. Somehow or another, they don't seem to like that too much. But anything else seems to go. They love being patted and they just like being touched on the side.
Are we sure about that? But this beach offered a rare chance to study dolphin behaviour in the wild. Dr. Rachel Smolka had been trying to crack their code for a decade.
People have generally classified their sounds as consisting of, there's echolocation clicks, and then there's burst pulse sounds, which are a whole lot of sound type sounds.
Burst pulses are used for communication between each other, whereas echolocation is used for hunting. And what they will do is send out a frequency, and that frequency will bounce back to the animal off the prey, and then they will be able to determine where it is.
But sometimes they mixed it up, using burst pulses to confuse prey or echolocation to coordinate group hunting. It added a layer of complexity.
And the gradation between sounds that they use for echolocation and the sounds that they use, it's difficult to sort of draw a line and say, these are used for echolocation and these are used for communication. And, you know, this is burst pulse and that's echolocation. That line doesn't exist.
And while there were many theories behind this elaborate system of clicks, whistles and pulses, verifying them was a challenge.
It's been said that they can actually stun a fish with the signals, sound signals. Do you think accurate?
I think it's probably. I think the evidence is pretty good, but the big problem is that it hasn't really been seen in the wild at this point.
It took another 14 years for scientists to witness, but we now know dolphins really do have killer clicks. Yet the waters of Monkey Mia still swirl with mysteries.
It's really hard to study anything in the wild. There's so many external contributing factors. Monkey Mia as well is a tourist destination, so you'll have impacts from behaviour that has changed from that. You really have to have a pristine, clear environment, and sometimes that's incredibly difficult to get to.
8 years later, Dutch scientists were still unravelling the mysteries of dolphin behaviour. In this puzzling case, Dr. Wim Verboom was trying to understand how one of the world's smartest creatures was falling victim to trawler nets.
Harbor porpoises, or dolphins in general, produce sound. The sound is emitted, it is reflected by the net, and they have to know, because they have a highly sophisticated echolocation system, that there is a net. And still, they get entangled.
Wim couldn't pinpoint why, but he was already working on solutions. The first step was decoding dolphin speak.
So is this a dolphin or dolphins?
It is a harbor porpoise, and he makes a kind of a whoop-whoop sound, which means that he is happy.
But in this next experiment, he was hoping for whistles of fear. Wim was using his know-how of dolphin talk to develop a fishnet alarm that warned dolphins of danger. Initial trials were promising. one high-frequency sound inaudible to humans scared away the porpoises. The true test would be in the wild.
Okay, yeah, hold it. Smaller mark. Okay.
On the coastline, Dr. Roy Castellane was preparing for sea trials, where they would attach their alarms to real trawler nets.
Okay. Research is very necessary, and during the time that everybody who's living now on Earth, in the next 20, 30 years, the world population will double. So that means there will be more and more pressure on all the animals living in the sea, and to make sure that those animals will survive, you need knowledge for these animals, and time is running out.
Thankfully, Roy's test was a success. Acoustic alarms are now used on fishing nets around the globe. They've reduced dolphin entanglements by nearly 90%.
Being able to have technology that allows us to get what we need, food, without destroying what we don't want to destroy, dolphins, is just such a great thing.
And in the future, we may also have the tools to finally talk to animals.
AI is an incredible tool for conservation and science and animal behaviour. Who knows what we can do with that? It would be the most incredible thing to understand what an animal is saying to another animal, and it could be completely different to what we've thought over the last 50 years. I love that stuff.
While technology brought scientists closer to wild species than ever, for the rest of us, it was an impossible fantasy. Unless you worked in TV.
Imagine visiting a zoo where you could get this close to its residents.
At Singapore Zoo, being an animal no longer means you have to forego all your freedoms. Most barriers are now psychological rather than physical.
Back then, zoos were really just seen as entertainment. As we gained a better understanding of animal psychology through the 80s and 90s, we started to realize the way that we kept them in things like zoos or water worlds maybe wasn't the kindest.
And this brave new approach hoped to transform these places from a prison into a sanctuary.
Many of the animals here, including these Malayan tapirs, could escape their enclosures just as easily as I jumped in. But they don't. They don't want to escape because they don't need to escape. The reason that they're content to stay here in the absence of any physical restraints is that they've been psychologically restrained.
The zoo replicated animals' wild habitats, and with all their food, shelter and companionship needs met, the creatures had no reason to leave. But just in case, the terrain acted as a barrier.
Look at it this way. I can easily walk this plank when it's on the ground. If I place it a little higher, I can still go the distance. But raise it 2 or 3 metres in the air, and even though I know I can walk its length, a fear of heights is enough to dissuade me. Similarly, these spider monkeys could very easily jump the width of the moat, but they hate getting their tails wet. And that dislike of water is enough to keep them on that side of the moat.
It was a radical idea, but the animals seemed happy. In 18 years, only 6 had escaped. And in the decades that followed, zoos around the world began to rethink their place in the animal kingdom.
Zoos really became this place of conservation, education, and research. Being able to take that knowledge and share it with the public also became a really important part of what people went to the zoo for.
Zoos around the globe now spend $350 million on conservation. They're home to nearly 100 species extinct in the wild and are helping secure the future of the natural world. The 80s and 90s were decades of rapid urbanisation, but as cities grew bigger, wilderness was pushed aside. Many missed the natural world, and what better way to fill that void than with a dog or a cat?
Pets are definitely a way for people to feel connected to something. And so we saw a boom in pet ownership, and suddenly pets started to feel like not just an animal that we live with, but part of our family.
But finding the perfect new member for your tribe was like searching for a soulmate.
More than 3 million cats are taken to shelters each year because their personalities don't suit their owners.
So Dr. Soraya Hurabi Diaz designed a test to profile felines and pair them with people.
So what are we going to do first?
First, we're going to see how much petting Sphinx tolerates over the tail-base area, which is a favorite place for a lot of cats, but not for all of them.
How Sphinx liked it would reveal her temperament, fiery, fearful, or complacent.
She doesn't seem too upset.
Not terribly at this point, no.
But to truly assess her tolerance, there was the stroke test.
Now, we're not just talking about a little scratch behind the ears. This has to be full-on, heavy-duty petting for as long as poor old Sphinx can take it. It certainly doesn't seem to mind it. I think I'm going to tire out before she does.
And whether that stamina was matched by a killer instinct was determined using this string.
We've just got ourselves a lazy cat here.
Right.
And then there was an alarm which showed their reactions to sudden shocks.
Okay, so that's the kind of reaction that we actually want. We want a cat that gets alerted by it, perhaps moves back a little bit, but doesn't panic and run up the curtains.
After analysing each cat, Dr. Jurabe Diaz built a personality profile. New owners could pick their perfect match with confidence and save millions of abandoned felines from the pound.
I'm not a cat person, but the idea of having like a dating profile for your pet is at least appealing in a way, because you can make the wrong decision.
And in Ireland, wannabe dog owners were missing the mark over and over again. Over 30,000 canines were getting ditched each year and faced the dark fate of euthanasia.
If you're a dog lover, there's no more heartbreaking sight in the world than seeing them in a pound like this. The ISPCA will hold a dog for up to 5 days to give its owner a chance to reclaim it. But in the future, these animals will stand a much better chance of survival because of microchip implants.
In a 2-minute procedure, a unique chip was injected into the neck. So if they were abandoned, their origin could be traced.
To identify the dog's owner, the warden carries with him a scanner which transmits a low-frequency radio signal. When passed over the appropriate area of skin, excuse me, Sheba, the signal activates the microchip, which transmits the special code back to the scanner. On the screen appears the number for that dog. A further check on computer file reveals all the necessary information on the owner. Sheba?
Microchipping dogs is a really important thing. It's good for the dog, it's good for the owner, it's good for animal shelter facilities, and it's good for just our care of animals.
Today, dog and cat implants are mandatory in over 20 countries. More governments are following suit. Meanwhile, in Australia, dog life was pretty sweet. The sun was shining and canines were lapping it up.
No, this isn't just some silly sight gag. This is legitimate science. You see, just like us, when animals get older, the pupils of their eyes become less elastic and harder to constrict. Not only can that cause them considerable discomfort when they go out in bright sunlight, but it can also damage the animal's retinas and affect their eyesight.
The dog sunnies beat surgery. They were cheaper, less fuss, and more fun.
Let's go play ball. Come on, then.
Showing our furry friends a good time was becoming an expensive pursuit. We were styling them with fresh cuts, Hermes robes and matching jewellery. But none of this rivaled the money Japan was spending. Department stores were now brimming with luxury grooming services and kennels, some costing $12,000.
Just take a look at this control panel. There's fan-forced ventilation, floor heating, and insects must be a real problem in Japan because there's a mosquito zapper, a slow-release insect repellent, an air curtain to stop the insects from coming into the kennel, and on top of that, just to keep your pet amused, radio and television. Talk about a dog's life.
And if you wanted to kick back in front of the TV...
Come on, Poochie, time for a walk.
...and get out of taking the pup for a stroll, there was this, a $1,250 treadmill. But you could save money when your dog passed. The Pet Angel service was a $500 mobile cremation, which made saying sayonara cheap and convenient. Instead of pricey ceremonies, families could have a funeral at home with a stand-in pastor.
We're gathered here today to say farewell to a much-loved member of the Okayama family. Their little one was tragically killed in an automobile accident, but is now resting peacefully in that great kennel in the sky.
Thank goodness Google Translate hadn't been invented yet. The incineration was more sensitive. In a truck outside the house, the pet was cremated. It was odourless, smokeless, and the ashes were handed over on a silver platter.
Japan was really at the forefront, if you will, of pet ownership, and that has persisted to today. There are so many cafes. You can pet capybaras, you can pet owls, you can pet cats, you can pet hedgehogs, and today, pets outnumber kids in Japan.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy. Yeah.
With domestic companions in high demand, some resorted to desperate measures. And no, they weren't stealing pooches.
Well, you won't find this Fido falling for the old "here you eat this while I borrow the stereo" trick. This electronic watchdog detects the movement of intruders through glass, timber, and brick. Now, the internal organs of this German Shepherd, however, are slightly unusual. This radar detects movement and activates the circuit board here. The bark is then synthesized through a loudspeaker. Now, 5 meters away, it gives a warning woof, and just like a well-trained watchdog, the barking gets more ferocious the closer you come. Right, down, boy.
When it comes to deterring thieves, police say have a radio on at home so that thieves thinks that there is somebody actually in the house there. Having a dog barking is the same concept. Is it convincing? Well, I think most thieves aren't all that bright, so if there is a noise there, they're just more likely to go on to the next house.
But for the smart crooks, we had to stick with a real pooch. This one didn't look tough, but it was helping catch felons on the run.
These are the smells of 60 of the Netherlands' most wanted criminals, and their scents have been extracted from cars, beds, clothes, and numerous items that they've touched. A library like this is useful because each individual has a unique smell. And if you can store that scent and then train a police dog to identify the owner of it, you have an effective new weapon in the fight against crime.
Dubbed the world's first scent bank, this bold new pursuit to catch felons began with a scent-absorbing cloth. It was soaked in chemicals that trapped odour molecules and then used to collect evidence at the crime scene.
They pick up the item with a cloth and they put it into the ventilation chamber. Now, that ventilation process evaporates the odour onto the cloth. Then the jar is sealed and it's kept for up to 3 years.
Crime fighting had gone to the dogs. They were trained on the smell and then let loose on the lineup.
Shorty.
With a nose 10,000 times stronger than humans, it was no surprise that this dog was striking gold every time. But to truly test his skill, Amanda Keller put herself up as a suspect.
Sergeant, here's your evidence.
Okay, thank you.
In this test, a dog trained on a watch had to identify the same smell on a different item, a steel rod.
Well, what a smart dog. She picked the rods that I'd been handling both times. Lucky for me, a suspect can't be convicted by this evidence alone. But in a court of law in this country, this sort of identification is used as supporting evidence. And for that reason, all the sniff tests done here are recorded on videotape and shown in court. In fact, this technique has already helped convict over 200 Dutch criminals.
Now, that is pretty incredible, but it wasn't as foolproof as they hoped. Dogs can have their off days as well. They can be distracted, they can have external contributing factors, so it wasn't 100%.
The smell bank no longer exists, but scent lineups can still be used as criminal evidence in several countries, like France, Germany, and parts of the US. Their accuracy continues to be debated. The years before 2000 set the stage for how we treat domestic animals today. We spend 10 times more on our pets than we did in the 80s, but wouldn't have it any other way.
In a world where we are, constantly online in the digital world, pets sort of bring us back to the real world, and that's a beautiful thing.
Humans have relied on animals for centuries to survive. From livestock to canine companions, creatures have helped us thrive. Even the most deadly ones. By 1986, we'd spent 100 years perfecting anti-venom formulas. And at the Butantan Institute in Brazil, biologists had mastered the art of milking snakes and shocking scorpions and spiders for their venom.
They extract about 10 grams of dry venom each year from 2 different types of scorpion and 2 different types of spider. Now, this dry, white crystalline substance at the bottom of the bottle here represents about 2 months' production from the small but deadly Luxoceles spider, and this is about the same amount of production from the yellow scorpion. Now, what they do is they take all 4 of those venoms and they produce what's known as a polyvalent serum. That is one serum that's effective against all 4 of those spider and scorpion bites.
When you get a bite, you might not have seen what you got bitten with. And that's where polyvalent antivenoms come in. Because what they will do is give you an antivenom for all of the common nasties and bugs that are in your area.
Which is why the Institute was racing to develop more. Each day, more specimens arrived for researchers to study. But this next scene had nothing to do with the science of new antivenoms. It was just an excuse to see Ian Finlay sweat.
The Karangageras species of spiders is the largest in the world. They have a very large amount of venom, but contrary to popular belief, they're not dangerous to humans, or at least so they tell me. We can... The things I do for this program.
The quest to produce more polyvalent antivenoms has stalled since the 80s. They're expensive and complex to make. But the process may soon be streamlined.
There's a whole lot of technologies that have just come online that allow us to synthetically make antibodies. So these are antibodies that our bodies would usually make that were created in a lab, have been used to create a polyvalent serum.
Meanwhile, in Wales, another creepy story was unfolding at the world's one and only leech farm.
They're quite keen to escape, aren't they?
Oh, yes.
Some of them seem more active than others and they're swimming around. Are those the hungrier of the group?
Yeah, the hungrier leeches are the leeches that are swimming.
In medieval times, a ravenous leech was a miracle cure. They were used to suck unhealthy blood from the ill and treat everything from gout to arthritis, even farting. Now they were making a comeback, clearing congested veins in microsurgeries gone wrong.
Well, he's just bitten me and I'll bleed from that wound for quite a while because in his saliva there's an anticoagulant which stops the blood effectively from clotting. And that's why these leeches are so effective in modern microsurgery, particularly in the reconnection of severed limbs and fingers.
It's very hard to get our little veins and blood working exactly right after microsurgeries. And leeches make sure that our blood is nice and smooth, and it makes it more likely that the veins are going to heal correctly.
As surgeons became more aware of the benefits, leeches turned into big business. Zoologist Dr. Roy Sawyer was shipping the little suckers worldwide. He'd spent 12 years giving leeches a leg up in the medical world.
I think it's very clear that this type of work that we've embarked on will continue beyond my lifetime.
How would you describe your own relationship with leeches?
Quite a deep relationship. I think there's a commitment to the understanding of the animal.
No commitment qualms for our Roy. And thanks to his work, the leech has saved thousands of fingers, toes and limbs. A more recent medical development was human organ transplants. Its biggest challenge was supply. So in 1994, we began exploring a more dependable donor.
Pigs. For thousands of years, humans have bred them for food, as pork, ham, bacon, cutlets, chops, sausages. But now pigs are destined to serve humanity in a new way. British scientists at Cambridge have genetically engineered pigs to make it possible for their organs to be transplanted into humans.
Pigs are an obvious choice because they have the same blood groups as man, they're about the same size, they're easy to farm, and you get lots of them.
And they could theoretically replace any organ. But Dr. John Warwork was starting with the most important one.
The heart of most animals is fixed up in the same way. The connections are the same. And so the connections from a physical point of view of us just connecting them two together is not going to be a big problem.
But there would be other roadblocks, like facing the controversy.
You've got the animal ethics to consider. Should you be sacrificing an animal life of your own? But also this massive hurdle that, anyway, our human body rejects it. And early attempts at this have led to failures. So why was this going to be different?
The team were genetically engineering pigs to make their organs easier to accept. Scientists took a fertilised ovum from a pregnant female, injected it with 2,000 human genes, and reimplanted it into a virgin pig. 4 months later, a litter was born. The program had been producing transgenic piglets for 2 years. Immunologist Dr. David White was now preparing for clinical trials.
Our view of the end of this phase of the research project is that we would be breeding pigs to provide organs for surgeons to transplant.
Unfortunately, that did not turn out to be the case, and it wasn't until 2022 where we had the first pig heart xenotransplantation. And the patient lived 7 weeks and died of complications. It was a learning experience, and I think the story's not over yet.
Pig transplants were pretty out there, but scientists had been tweaking the biology of animals for decades.
Artificial insemination was first experimented with way back at the turn of the century. It was a technique that was a real breakthrough in improving the genetics of our livestock. But today, the reproductive technology revolution has gone much, much further, creating identical twins on the farm to double the number of possible offspring.
Embryo splitting promised to mass-produce elite livestock like never before. Breeders injected cows with top-shelf bull semen. 7 days later, they flushed out the embryos with a catheter and a bag of solution.
They can be frozen for future use, or I can physically split each embryo, doubling the number and creating identical twins simply by using this portable kit. The embryos are in solution, and under low magnification, I can just see them and suck one up with this pipette. Yes, got him, or her. It's this apparatus, though, which is the key to the ease of splitting embryos. Essentially, a very fine blade attached to an electronic micromanipulator. I'll put the embryo into that micro droplet. Now, with coarse movements, I can bring the blade down with this until it's almost in place. But for the real delicate splitting of the embryo, this joystick is used. And in a excruciatingly slow process, you can get the blade right on top of the embryo. That doesn't look too bad. And then with one cut, now I've got 2 embryos.
Which would develop into healthy, normal offspring. The technique was so successful, it was being used on goats, deer and sheep. So where would it end? Artificial breeder Dr. Charles Herr couldn't predict.
It's difficult for me to say that the technology will or will not be applied to humans. However, I believe that it's the same with any technology. Man has to make a decision about what he will apply and what he won't apply to the human. He must take responsibility for that.
Fast forward 6 years and human cloning wasn't a thing, but the technology was entering uncharted territory, starting with the world's most famous sheep.
Dolly was created without sex, without sperm, without fertilisation. She has only one natural parent, an adult ewe from which she was cloned, something that we never believed would be possible.
It meant she was identical to her mother, just 6 years younger. The DNA from a full-grown female was transplanted into an empty egg.
And the egg was able to reprogram that cell and turn it into the state a cell is when you're born.
And 5 months later, Dolly arrived in the world. It was the first time a mammal had been cloned from a single adult. People's imaginations ran wild. Could we create a super race?
It's been suggested that perhaps we should clone an Einstein every generation. There's no guaranteeing that the Einstein you clone would even like mathematics.
And as it turns out, Dolly's procedure had complications. She developed early arthritis, a sign her DNA was the same age as her mother's.
And so there was this question of, well, maybe it's actually problematic to be taking an adult cell and trying to grow it from scratch, because you're inheriting all of the defects of an adult cell into that cell.
6 years later, Dolly died. She lived half the lifespan of a regular sheep, but not all scientists blame cloning. We've now duplicated mice, cattle, deer, horses, and monkeys, but we still haven't perfected the art.
Getting viable offspring from cloned animals is still extremely hard, but in the agriculture industry, in the animal racing industry, and in the pet perpetuity industry, cloning is used because certain animals are very valuable, but it maybe hasn't taken off in the way we might have thought it has.
The 80s and 90s were a time of reckoning. Nearly 3,000 species were now threatened, and as we scrambled to protect them, we came up against some powerful forces.
For so long, rangers have had to fight poachers with inferior weapons and equipment. But with worldwide attention now focused on the plight of the elephant, funds for these troops have increased. And the rangers are now facing poachers on equal footing as far as their weapons are concerned. Perhaps a vehicle like the Seikka will give them the edge they need to win the war.
The Seikka was a lethal dune buggy originally built for the British Army. Now it had a new mission, to end the slaughter of Kenyan elephants. Their population had halved in just 15 years.
Ivory was something that poachers wanted because it made them a lot of money. And so if we had a vehicle or a technology that could stop that, well, that's a great thing.
And if the Seikka was tough enough for the special forces, surely it could handle chasing illegal hunters. It was speedy, nimble, and could climb rough terrain.
Oh, that's quite a ride. As you're approaching some of those inclines, you think there's no way any vehicle can possibly make it up there. And coming down's another story. Nice driving, Alex. The Seikka's designed to hold two people, a driver and a gunner who sits where I am. The surfaces of the vehicle are all flat to allow the gunner to move about freely and operate mounted weapons.
Like a 40mm grenade launcher or a 30mm cannon. But when it came to showing off this firepower on the move, the team got overexcited. With the buggy in recovery, surveillance didn't stop. It reached new heights with the power chute. This single-seat flying machine took only 10 minutes to set up. And while it looked like a sitting duck, it gave rangers the upper hand.
That's an absolutely insane idea, the power chute. If we can get into the air and we can survey more of the area that we're trying to protect, then that's a great idea. But it also doesn't feel like it's practical.
From 3,000 feet, its operator could see everything and be seen by everyone. Scary. But today's power chutes are more useful.
Now we're developing drones. We're developing vehicles that are not necessarily crewed to take care of these problems that we had 40, 50 years ago.
While elephants were hunted for their tusks, grizzly bears were hunted for their flesh.
But how can you tell? Stop it.
In 1991, we found another excuse to get up close with wild and dangerous animals. But back to the question.
How can you tell if that bear meat came from a protected grizzly like that or from one of the black bears that, in law at least, is allowed to be hunted?
Enter a new field of science called animal forensics.
The only difference between our laboratory and any other police crime lab is that our victim is an animal.
The Ashland Forensics Lab was a world first. Using FBI-trusted techniques like gas spectrometry, researchers could determine whether it was a black or grizzly bear from the tiniest piece of flesh.
What sort of sample do you need to determine what species is involved?
The amount of tissue is actually very small. Certainly the size of your smallest fingernail would be adequate if the sample was in good condition.
The lab was also targeting unlawful hunting practices.
In parts of Oregon, there's a particular season to hunt black bear when you're only allowed to use a bow and arrow. Now, some hunters could shoot the poor beasts with a gun and then shove an arrow into the bullet hole to try and fool the wildlife rangers.
But they couldn't trick the forensics. Samples from the suspect were coated in carbon. Then, under an electron microscope, scientists would look for gunpowder residue. It revealed whether a bullet was used and brought illegal killers to justice. The lab didn't just protect bears, they were defending hundreds of species.
Right now, I would say the most effective thing we've done is the ivory. We've had a major impact on the trade in ivory, the illegal trade in ivory.
Now, CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, totally bans commerce in most modern ivories, particularly elephant. But the tricksters always use the defence, hey, this doesn't come from an elephant. It's ancient ivory from mammoth and mastodon graveyards. Now, mammoths were extinct at least 10,000 years ago, but their tusks are perfectly preserved.
So, forensic scientist Ed Espinosa had developed a method to determine ancient from modern ivory.
We measure the Schrager angles, or the markings found in the ivory itself.
They seem to be fairly wide, so that would be elephant?
Correct.
Ashland Forensic Lab was an absolute pioneer in this space. They were CSI Animal Edition. They were way ahead of their time.
Now there are over 100 labs worldwide that investigate wildlife crime. They have helped double the number of Kenyan elephants and nearly triple the grizzly bear population of North America. But there are many more species still at risk.
Poaching is a massive issue across the globe. It's a very, very dangerous and complex area, and there's a lot of techniques around the world that are just getting better and better and better, but there's so much more to do.
Poachers weren't the only threat. For the California condor, urbanisation, lead poisoning and power lines were just as deadly. In 1987, there were only 27 left in the wild. So scientists made a drastic move. They captured them to breed in captivity.
Because there were so few, there was a fear that if you get it wrong, that you eradicate the species entirely.
The biggest challenge was their sex life. Condors only mate once a year. They favour raising their chick before getting busy again. But 9 years into the program, breeders had found a fix. A dummy mummy.
Meet Mother. Hello. Of the resin and fake fur variety. She may be just a puppet, but she has the very serious role of rearing and feeding the young, keeping them nice and relaxed, and reinforcing to the chicks that they're in fact condors and not humans.
Never letting them see, smell or hear humans was key to making sure the birds could survive in the wild.
There's you as a scientist, but also you as the pseudo-parent behind the puppet, raising the chick and watching it hatch and hoping for it at every move to do the right thing, to learn how to fly quickly.
You have to be a little quiet.
So once the babies hit their teens, they graduated from the incubator nests to a condominium. These viewing booths helped breeders train them for the big wide world while keeping up their disguise.
From dawn to dusk, these condors are filmed and monitored to observe certain aspects of their behaviour. For instance, in this screen you can see the isolation cage, and it contains a rigged crossarm which gives the birds a small electrical jolt if they land on it. In the wild, condors don't have a great flight record because they keep messing with power poles. But here, they quickly learn not to put a claw wrong.
Hey, who's this right here? Who's walking out?
That looks like the male?
The male, yeah.
There was one exception to the no-contact rule. To train the condors to fear humans, the keepers performed harassment exercises. It was the final step to prepare them for the wild. After 5 years, breeders had started returning them to their natural habitat. And by 1996, there were 15 condors back in the wild.
It really is exhilarating to see these birds, even as one who's worked with them for 15 years now. When I see them flying in the wild, it's hard not to get goosebumps.
The recovery of this iconic bird continues today. It's cost the US government over $45 million.
The Condor Conservation Project is, to this day, the most expensive conservation program that's ever been run in the US. But the condor also was so emblematic of its region, and to protect it, it required that funding.
There are now over 550 condors, nearly 350 live in the wild. But it wasn't the only conservation success before 2000.
Many different species were saved in the 80s and 90s, and so many different Australian species. It was a really important time, and we're very thankful for that now.
Leading up to the year 2000, we were closer to animals than ever before. Yet there were still some beasts that intimidated and reminded us of nature's untamed force.
Have you seen the results of a tiger attack?
Yes, I have seen.
And what is there to see?
Normally, if the tiger attacks, generally tiger takes the body. We don't get the body. We generally get some blood stain or some left clothings.
In 1990, we discovered a case of conservation collateral. India was now home to 17 Bengal tiger reserves, and nearby villages were paying the price.
The hard part is human-animal conflict is always going to be there. As populations grow and habitats are lost, apex predators are going to end up coming in contact with communities.
Over 600 people had lost their lives to the big cats. And while many relied on traditional practices for protection, like daily prayers to the tiger goddess Banabi, local wildlife manager Mr. Seth saw need for a more scientific approach.
Once a month?
Once a week.
He had developed a program to understand and prevent attacks. The team was recording the paws of each tiger to literally keep track of them all.
As per the last census, it is 269, you see.
269 tigers here in the Sundarbans.
Yes.
Those who work in the Sundarbans have enormous respect both for the ferocity and the intelligence of these tigers. One theory is that the ferocity is due to the salinity of the water. Most attacks occur in this month because it's the hottest and the driest, so the salt level in the water increases. As for intelligence, well, all attacks occur from behind, always to the right-hand side of the neck, and if walking in file, the third person is most likely to be the victim.
These vital stats informed an elaborate defence strategy.
This double fencing around our compound is perhaps the most obvious evidence of attempts to keep the tigers at bay, but it's by no means the most bizarre.
This double-faced mask won that award. If tigers attacked from behind, then why not confuse it with a face on both sides?
Then there's this. That track is a known path for tigers, but they've laid an ambush. Well, more a shocking lesson in table manners. This effigy is of a villager making chapati, but it's wired to a battery and a spark coil. So when the tiger attacks, it gets a 300-volt shock, not to kill the tiger, but to teach it not to attack villagers.
So far, 3 tigers had been taught a lesson, and those makeshift masks were also fooling the big cats. No one wearing one had been attacked.
If you've got eyes on that animal and you're walking away from it, it still thinks that you're looking at it, and it doesn't take that opportunity to attack. So it's an incredibly innovative, fantastic way to try and save lives.
It was a bold, non-lethal strategy which halved the human death rate. But tigers and people are still learning how to live alongside one another. The future of the Bengal tiger is now secure, but nearly 100,000 locals have been forced to leave their homes since the 1970s. They're now fighting for land rights.
The human cost of conservation is an incredibly complex conversation. You've got a community one side that wants to survive. On the other side, we've either got tourism or a government organisation that's trying to protect a habitat. Kindness, care, consultation is so important with Indigenous communities.
While tigers dominated the wetlands in India, down under, a native icon was becoming a nuisance.
Our little friend here, of course, is a prolific breeder. In her life, she'll probably have anything up to 12 joeys, and of course the gestation period for kangaroos is only 30 days.
So in 1986, Dr. Ted Stelmaziak started shooting them. Not with a real bullet, but with a contraceptive pill.
This procedure vaccinates animals against the brain factor which is responsible for sexual stimulation and sexual development. So we are removing animal libido, and they grow to a full physical size. They are physically mature, but they are not interested in opposite sex.
Squashing their sex drive would curb the rampant roo numbers and save other native species from the brink.
In some areas of Australia, there are so many kangaroos competing for the available food sources that other animals are becoming extinct. So what are the options? Do we slaughter them for pet food, or do we reduce their libido by giving them a contraceptive bullet?
Turning roos into kibble was the go-to method for population control. But according to Ted, the pill was more humane.
One of the things we're bound to get asked is, does the animal feel any real pain when the little bullet penetrates his flesh? Or
Yes, this bullet is very lightweight and is relatively sharp, so it penetrates skin very easily, and animals don't seem to notice the impact. And because it's lightweight, it goes about 1 to 1.5 inch under the skin, and then it's lodged in the muscle.
And over what period is that effective? Does it reduce the sex drive?
This treatment, it's very flexible. We could design one-shot vaccine to last 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, depending on circumstances.
Today's roo contraceptive lasts for 5 years. But it's not widely used because many believe humans shouldn't manipulate animal populations. While India and Australia managed tiger and kangaroo populations, in 1986, Dr. Paul McCready faced one colossal beast, building a flying replica of a pterodactyl.
Throw up.
The engineer was renowned for creating human-powered aircraft. He'd built the Gossamer Condor and then the Gossamer Albatross, the first and only man-powered plane to cross the English Channel. But making a Terasaur look real and also fly was his biggest challenge to date.
Well, these are some of the artist's impressions of what the wing might look like, and in particular the colour scheme. And they're just trying to work that out. And here you've got a couple of different types of colour schemes worked out. But the most difficult thing that they've had to try and decide is the actual structure itself, because they're working with a design that was set more than 60 million years ago. Here's the pterosaur that was discovered in the Big Bend National Park in Texas a little more than 10 years ago.
The fossil was so large, scientists questioned whether pterosaurs had ever flown. Paul's team hoped to settle the debate, starting with a fixed-wing model. But making it flap was a whole new problem. The huge wingspan demanded a power modern materials couldn't achieve, so instead they made it lighter.
Each wing is covered by 4 large pieces of this pure latex rubber that's stretched over the 170-odd ribs that make up the wing. And that only adds about ½ pound in weight to each wing, which weighs about 5 pounds, just about 2 kilos. And when it moves and flaps up and down, you see that although it's very light, it's still very strong.
And it had enough power to launch the bird into the air. But once in flight, there were other hurdles: movement and stability.
The animal has a hand halfway out along the wing, and so we will be using this by raising the fingers of the hand, which adds animation to the QN, and this will now create a drag on one side of the bird and will help create turns during flight.
And with the help of a custom-built autopilot, these manoeuvres could be corrected in real time. When the moment of truth came, the bird flew beautifully. but only for a few seconds.
The first test flight of this model did crash, but in their defense, the next 6 were successful. They got some good mileage out of this model, and I think doing something that feels a little bit like a stunt works really well to pique people's interest and draw them in to learn more.
The model now lives at the Air and Space Museum in an exhibit that proves that pterodactyls could in fact fly. In the 80s and 90s, we saw a revolution in the animal-human bond. We fought back against poachers, made giant strides in conservation, and realised pets were key to our well-being and happiness. They were decades of reconnection and hope, where we discovered the power of living in beast mode.